Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh mon dieu. Ay Dios mío. I picked a really bad day to sleep in because waking up to this news blew my mind. Yeah, I said here the Bucks made a devious move. This was cunning. This was clever. I it was funny, literally just last night I was thinking about the Bucks and I'm like, are they just kind of screwed? Are they just kind of stuck? Cuz I was like looking over, okay, if I was the Bucks GM, what can you do? How do you salvage this? How do you potentially keep Giannis? And I was just going over my list and I'm like, well, you could trade you could fire Doc Rivers for a start, which they probably won't do, and I don't expect them to necessarily do that now. And then I'm just like, okay, I got nothing, boss. With Damian Lillard's contract, I don't know what happens. And then it's like, I did not foresee them just being able to just flat out waive Damian Lillard and then pull off a massive coup like this. I did not see that as an option. And yeah, it's funny, like, as soon as this happened, I think there was a big question that people had and were discussing, like on the NBA subreddit, was okay, if the Bucks can do this with Damian Lillard, how come the Suns can't just do this with Bradley Beal? And of course, the answer is that the Suns are in a financially heinous situation. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about this: the fact that the Bucks pulled off one of the biggest coups I can remember in a little while. Because, like, damn, if Myles Turner was not critically important to the Pacers' run to the finals. And um, Pacers fans, I'm sorry, this must be kind of rough to come like as close as you possibly conceivably could to your first title, and then to lose it in such dramatic, unfortunate fashion when Hallie went down. And now, another team that was on the receiving end of an unfortunate Achilles injury to swoop in and I mean, ultimately, the Pacers front office have only themselves to blame because I'm sure if they were willing to, put their own financials up into, slightly risky territory, but they had a winning team, I'm sure they could have matched this offer for Myles Turner. And I'm fairly surprised they didn't. I mean, Myles Turner, he was the guy who he had been on the Pacers a long time throughout all those eras, through Paul George and then being there with Sabonis as well, and now the start of the Halliburton era. And yeah, really was like, in many ways, represented the franchise. And look, I mean, the financials, they are what they are, but it is just interesting to see him, like I said, get cooed by a team that seemingly was not in the position to do so. But, not without sacrifice. So I guess uh, we got to talk about Dame a bit. Man, this is just kind of tragic. As someone who's been a fan of Dame for years, all throughout the Portland era, you would really have liked to see things work out in Milwaukee. And okay, let's flash back for a moment. If you can put your brain back into 2023 and be honest with ourselves, if you remember when the Bucks traded for Damian Lillard, we were all to the moon with this. I don't remember there being hardly any detractors, even with Dame getting up there, and I think the last couple of seasons in Portland he had some injury issues. I don't remember really anyone thinking, yeah, this could be a risky move for the Bucks. Pretty much everyone was just thinking Kobe and Shaq 2.0. Like, that was kind of like what the expectation was like. People immediately were putting the Bucks up like title favorites, like they can challenge the Nuggets. Yeah, and then things just got real weird, and I kind of can't help but think, like, could they have maybe started to figure it out a bit if, like, maybe if they had stuck with Adrian Griffin, and I'm sure they fired Adrian Griffin for a reason, but as soon as they pulled in Doc Rivers, it was like, okay, I don't know if they're really gonna find their footing. It was just really unfortunate, and there were times where, well, of course, Giannis looked great throughout most of that time, and then there were times where Damian Lillard looked great. I mean, his first season in Milwaukee was fairly disappointing, and second season wasn't a ton better, but there were plenty of times where Damian Lillard would lock in and get them a great win. He would be super clutch and making all those classic Dame shots, and it looked like it could work. It was just like, for whatever reason, when Dame and Giannis were on the floor together, they just never found that synergy that you would expect they would have, and you know, as guys who are both, solid playmakers, guys who seem like unselfish guys who just want to win, you would think they would have figured it out. But, all that was kind of like a moot point once the Damian Lillard injury happened. Like an Achilles injury at his age, it was going to be a long recovery process, and who knows what state he would be in when he returns. I hope to God that whenever Damian Lillard returns, he can get somewhere close to all-star caliber play again, but it's no guarantee. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if when he makes his comeback, he's averaging like 17, 18 points on not great efficiency, and whatever explosiveness he used to have is just not there, and then he just kind of quietly rides out the last few seasons of his career. I hope that's not the case. I hope he can go somewhere, hopefully on, I would like to see him make money, but for the sake of winning, maybe he goes somewhere on a kind of bargain contract because it's kind of a gamble to bet on Damian Lillard now, and maybe he goes to a good team that already has a lot of other solid players, and then, I can talk myself into a scenario where Damian Lillard retiring with a ring is still possible, but at this point it's going to be like a Jason Kidd kind of ring. I can only imagine how Damian Lillard feels right now, and I mean, he was never so enthusiastic about leaving Portland. That relationship ended on just bad terms, and it didn't. It seemed like he was in a pretty bad place mentally when he came to Milwaukee, and it's a shame that I can't imagine things are much better now that he's leaving under these circumstances. But the Bucks were cunning. The Bucks were devious. They saw an opportunity and they took it, and all of a sudden they opened things up for them a ton. So let's move on to talking about Myles Turner. I was real nervous yesterday when I saw that they lost Brook Lopez. Brook Lopez going to the Clippers, which is a very interesting move in its own right. But yeah, I was kind of thinking the Bucks are looking in a tough spot, man. If they're not paying Brook Lopez, like it makes sense. Brook Lopez was a great fit alongside Giannis for many years, and his ability to space the floor and also protect the rim, even as he got up there, he was a valuable contributor. It was only like a couple seasons ago, Brook Lopez still finished like third in DPOY voting. So Brook Lopez continued to be an impactful player, but you see how much he's getting up there, and it's like an Al Horford situation where you're just kind of like, oh, this guy is still really good, pairs with the team really well, good culture guy, but how long can you bet on a guy who's pushing 40? Especially a 7-footer's pushing 40. So certainly, Myles Turner can be a guy you could pair with Dame for a good long time, and it looks like they gave him a good 4-year contract, and making just over $25 million a year I think is perfectly reasonable given the caliber of play that we've seen from Myles Turner lately. Isn't this just a crazy picture too? I love basketball, man, action shots like that, but I mean, Myles Turner shot from three so damn well in these last playoffs. I mean, we've known that Myles Turner is one of the best three-point shooting, spacing bigs in the NBA, but to be shooting it like, I think throughout the whole Eastern Conference run, he was shooting like 46, 47% from three, like really up there with some of the best shooters on a loaded Pacers team. And just that fluidity to the offense and the versatility, just being such a big but shifty defender, defending the rim, and we saw how well he paired with Siakam. He paired great with Siakam, and I was a little worried when the Pacers first pulled in Siakam about the fit next to Myles Turner, but they really made it work, and I can only imagine Myles Turner and Giannis will pair even better together. Oh, but bear with me. This is just like my brain is abuzz with the possibilities now. This is super exciting actually for the Bucks. Interestingly though, seems like Giannis apparently from some reports is not very happy about this, which I think makes sense because it's like he sees the betrayal in the move, just waving Damian Lillard like that. Like Giannis likes integrity, and Giannis is smart enough to know, okay, if I years from now go down with a major injury, would the franchise do me like that? You know? So I imagine that's what's going on in Giannis's head. I'm sure and I hope that with a little bit of time, like once the shock is over of like what happened with Dame, Giannis will be able to see, oh, Myles Turner, that's a great guy to have in the front court with me, and all of a sudden the team is looking in a much more comfortable position going into this next season. And I mean, it is nice to like. It's a shame to say, but the Damian Lillard situation is just like going to be an albatross for them. Like they might have had to wait out the at least the entirety of this next season to just even see what state Dame was in, and trying to convince Giannis to stick around through that whole time. And the interesting thing is like, okay, if Giannis really is like feeling some type of way about this move, maybe the door for a Giannis trade is not quite shut. And they've done all these moves, and we're going to get into some of the other signings that the Bucks have made now, which also there's some really solid ones there. But yeah, it's interesting because I think there's still a slim possibility that if the fallout tensions escalate between Giannis and the front office a little bit more after this trade, maybe he still asks for a trade out of Milwaukee. But in general, I expect Giannis to, cooler heads will prevail, and they're going to try this in the next season, and it should work pretty well defensively, and then the spacing alongside Giannis, like the front court looks good now, which is crucial, which is huge, because like I said, just having Brook Lopez at his age out in there, it would have been it would have been incredibly risky for them to re-sign Brook Lopez. And that being said, they made some other cool pickups like Gary Harris now. Gary Harris was an interesting little one. He looked pretty solid there for several seasons on a rebuilding Magic team. I'm not sure how much he can contribute to a good winning team right now. And last season, he only averaged like 3 points. Obviously, as the Magic got better, he saw his role decrease. On his career with the Magic, averaged about 7.8 points. I'm not sure if he'll quite get back to that, but bringing in some more guard talent. Obviously, he's not going to replace Dame or anything, but I believe they also re-signed Gary Trent, who is a guy I would like to keep betting on. He was a guy who, I think it was during his time on the Raptors, put up a good 20 points per game at one point, and I don't expect Gary Trent is like a true, like 20 point per game scorer on a good team, but yeah, a guy who should space the ball pretty well, and from what we've seen from Gary Trent in Milwaukee so far, hasn't been super exciting or electric. He's been fairly inconsistent, but there still have been some flashes, and I think re-signing him just kind of made sense because you need to bet on some kind of guy like that, and I don't know who else they could have afforded who has flashed that kind of potential. So, and it looks like they also re-signed Taurean Prince. Taurean Prince is a very interesting player. It seems at many points in his career he's actually been quite a winning player in spite of he doesn't exactly always have averages that jump out to you, and he doesn't seem like a big free agency get, but he was, I guess, a little impactful on the last couple of in-season tournaments in particular on both the Lakers and the Bucks. So, and plus, more front court depth. And speaking of front court depth, the Bucks re-signing Bobby Portis. That was something I expected them to do, especially when yesterday this move hadn't happened, and then them losing Brook Lopez. I'm like, okay, they've kind of got to re-sign Bobby Portis now, because as far as a guy in the front court who can space the floor, yeah. Bobby Portis seems like ever since 2021, where he looked like one of the best role players in the league on that championship run, hasn't quite reached those same heights. Recently, he flashed a little bit of potential, and I can't remember if it was this season or last season, but he kind of entered the Sixth Man of the Year conversation again, and I think he had his moments before the Bucks got eliminated in these playoffs. So Bobby Portis, I think it was cool that they re-signed him. Certainly, it's good to have somebody sticking around from that 2021 title run. And Kevin Porter Jr. also re-signed. I'm not going to comment any more on that. I'm just going to say I don't like it. I don't like Kevin Porter Jr. being on this team. But very exciting, interesting news, especially to wake up to on a random Tuesday morning. But all of a sudden, things are in general looking a lot better for the Bucks right now. I guess we got to talk about the Pacers a little bit more too. Uh, Feels bad, man. Like I said, I wish they could have kept Turner, and we'll see where they stand. They've got to wait a while for Halliburton to make his recovery. There's a chance Halliburton could return to play the end of this next season. We'll see if they're able to secure some kind of playoff seeding without Halliburton. I feel like they should be able to. I mean, guys like Neesmith and Nembhard look so damn good in the playoffs, and Pascal Siakam looks like a real true superstar player now. So, and with a great coach like Rick Carlisle, you know, I think they should be able to, in an Eastern Conference that's still fairly weak, make the playoffs if they want to. But now they did make that move, trading with the Pelicans. They traded their pick this year so they can get their own pick back for 2026. So if things do go sour for the Pacers, hey, at least you have your own pick. You can, if you want to, at the end of the season, just tank. And if you could bring in a young player to this already pretty solid Pacers core, like even mine is Myles Turner, this is still a really solid core for the Pacers. And I heard some people saying, is the door open now for a Pascal Siakam trade? And I'm like, why would you do that right now? Way too much all at once. Don't break things up unless you're forced to right now. You were maybe forced to give up Myles Turner, but don't push it any more than that. Try and see if you can hold on to something that you had going in this finals run. But, if you've got to tank this next season, at least you've got your own pick. So, things are interesting for Indiana too. Man, the NBA news, it never does stop. So, I guess got to be prepared to keep putting out videos. So, if you found anything about this video entertaining at all, consider subscribing. I would greatly appreciate it. And yeah, I guess on to the next.